the last subway ride. Tokyo's subway system was usually a predictable rhythm of steel, motion, and scattered chatter, yet tonight it felt different. Unnervingly still, almost suspended. Kei, a young office worker, had stayed late, and the empty station reflected his footsteps with a hollow echo, as though the very walls were listening. The fluorescent lights above flickered intermittently, casting brief, stuttering shadows along the tiled corridors, shadows that seemed longer, darker, and more purposeful than they should have been. As the train approached, its headlights cutting through the underground gloom, Kei noticed something peculiar. The station map, normally a bright mosaic of colored lines and numbers, displayed a station he had never seen before. It was marked in pale gray, an absence rather than a destination, yet a small blinking icon suggested the train would stop there. He rubbed his eyes and glanced around. No other passengers seemed to notice. The automated announcements carried the usual tones, but with a slight delay, warping the familiar cadences into an eerie, mechanical hum. The doors opened silently, an unnatural hush filling the platform. Kei stepped inside the train car, noting the stillness. No chatter, no shuffle, no advertisement screens flickering. Only the faint hum of the wheels and the rhythmic rattle against the rails. He found an empty seat near the window, but as the train began to move, he felt a subtle vibration under his feet, as if the car were gliding not on rails but through something denser, heavier. Outside, the tunnels seemed to stretch endlessly, shadows pooling at angles that defied reason. A distant voice, distorted and reverberating, seemed to come from the walls of the train itself. "Next stop, unknown," it whispered just beneath comprehension. Kei's heart thumped, but curiosity anchored him, preventing panic, for now. The lights inside the car flickered, revealing faces pressed against the windows. Not passengers but pale figures, their eyes hollow, their mouths moving silently as if chanting his name. The shadows behind them stretched unnaturally along the train walls, weaving into the seats, forming tendrils that seemed almost alive. As the train passed familiar stations, none of the usual signs appeared. Instead, every name was replaced by a question mark, glowing faintly. Kei leaned forward, gripping the edge of his seat, trying to rationalize what he saw. But logic fractured with every blink. One window reflected the station he thought he had left 10 minutes ago. Then, in the next reflection, it was somewhere else entirely, a place not on any map, shrouded in mist and darkness. His pulse quickened as he realized the train was moving through a geography he could not comprehend, a liminal space between the real city and something else entirely. Kei glanced back at the figures. One of them raised a hand, beckoning. The motion was deliberate, slow, and filled with intent, yet the movement was impossible. Its arms stretched across the car, across walls, before snapping back to normal. The whispers intensified, almost forming words. "Step off, join us." His rational mind screamed to resist, to leap off at the next station. Yet no familiar stops appeared, only the pale blinking icon, the station that did not exist. A cold dread settled in his chest. The train's rhythm felt deliberate, purposeful, as though the very wheels were carrying him toward a destination that wanted him, not merely transported him. And then through the window Kei saw it, a thick, swirling fog blanketing a platform unlike any he had ever seen. Figures waited there, not alive, not dead, but something in between, their forms twisted and ethereal, eyes fixated on the train. The air seemed to hum with anticipation, as if the station itself exhaled, calling him forward. Kei's fingers tightened around the seat handle. Every instinct screamed to stop, but the train did not slow. The last station, this unknown, impossible place, loomed closer. The whistle sounded, hollow, metallic, and distorted, yet no doors opened yet. The figures outside moved slightly, synchronized, swaying like a slow tide. Kei's breath caught. He knew the moment he stepped onto that platform he would not return to the Tokyo he knew. Something ancient, patient, and infinitely hungry waited beyond that threshold. And the train carried him closer, unstoppable. The train jolted slightly as it approached the spectral station, a hollow resonance vibrating through the car. Kei's knuckles were white around the seat handle, his eyes darting between the swaying figures outside and the fog-enshrouded platform. There was no hum of electricity, no scent of steel rails, only a cold, damp air pressing in from the darkness beyond the windows. Each breath seemed heavier than the last, as though the mist itself sought to draw him into its embrace. He noticed the other passengers again, if they could be called that. Pale, faceless and eerily still, they occupied the seats opposite him, their bodies draped over the benches as if slumped in sleep, yet their heads were subtly angled toward him. Sometimes, in the flicker of the dim lights, he thought their empty eye sockets glimmered faintly, a reflection of his own fear. His rational mind rebelled. There must be a logical explanation. A hallucination, exhaustion, a trick of the dim subway lights. But deep in his chest, a primal terror whispered otherwise. The train slowed, almost imperceptibly, but it did not stop. The fog outside thickened, curling into shapes that reminded Kay of faces contorted in silent screams, limbs that reached for the car with impossible angles. The station name flashed on the digital signboard, but instead of Japanese characters or numbers, it displayed only END. His stomach lurched. End of the line? End of reality? The thought struck him with icy force. Something was waiting, and it knew he was coming. He pressed his forehead to the window, searching the mist for anything familiar. There, glimpses of other passengers from previous trains, their expressions twisted in horror, frozen in the same liminal space he now occupied. Were they alive? Dead? Or trapped somewhere between dimensions, waiting for the next person foolish enough to follow? A shiver ran through him as a hand appeared briefly on the outside of the glass, too human to be entirely missed, yet too distorted to belong to any living person. The hand flexed and beckoned, then disappeared. Kay's thoughts spun in a frantic loop. He could jump from the train, but the tunnel seemed endless. Every attempt to trace the tracks back toward known stations dissolved into mist and shadows. The train was no longer on a linear path. It was moving along some geometry that his mind could not parse, bending, folding, stretching through spaces that existed and yet did not. And behind him, the whispers began again, soft, deliberate, sibilant. They were calling him, shaping words around his own name, each syllable a weight pressing into his consciousness. Then one of the pale figures stirred. A girl, maybe 12 or 13, sat several rows back. Her hair hung over her face, but she raised a finger slowly toward him. Kay's pulse spiked. Her motion was mirrored perfectly by another figure directly opposite, then another, until a rhythm formed, synchronized with the slow, grinding wheels of the train. It was a call and response, a silent invitation, or warning, that he could neither ignore nor fully comprehend. Kay tried to avert his gaze, focusing instead on the fog outside. The station's platform was no longer static. It seemed alive, a writhing landscape of shifting shadows. Shapes of people, animals, and unidentifiable forms pressed against the edge of perception, teasing him with glimpses of movement. The air vibrated with a low hum, harmonics that resonated deep in his chest, synchronizing with his heartbeat until it felt like the train and his body were fused in one trembling, urgent rhythm. A mechanical screech announced the approach to the platform, yet the doors did not open. The train slowed to a crawl, barely moving, suspended between two realities. Kay realized with a creeping horror that he was no longer a passenger. He was the prey. The figures, the fog, the station, they were all aware of him, and whatever waited beyond the doors was patient, calculated, inevitable. He could feel it through the floor of the car, through the very air around him. A hunger, an expectation, an ancient insistence that some doors, once opened, could never close again. As the lights flickered for the third time in a heartbeat, Kay noticed something he hadn't before. A faint, glowing inscription on the floor, etched into the metal seams of the train. It was a language he could not read, yet its meaning was clear. It pulsed like a heartbeat in tandem with the train, drawing him closer to the platform's edge, toward a destiny he was powerless to escape. The whispers rose to a crescendo, forming an almost intelligible sentence. Step off, join us, or remain forever in between. Kay's breath caught. He was no longer deciding whether to move. The train, the station, and the figures outside had decided for him. The doors would open. And the unknown waited. The train's doors groaned as though protesting some unseen force, and a thin sliver of light spilled from the gap, illuminating the swirling fog that pressed against the car. Kay's stomach churned. Every instinct screamed for him to retreat, yet something, fear, curiosity, or an invisible compulsion, propelled him forward. His hands gripped the edges of the seat as he leaned toward the opening, eyes wide to see the platform beyond. What he saw made his blood run cold. The station was not a station at all, but a vast void stretching endlessly into darkness, punctuated only by flickering shadows that moved independently of any known laws. Figures drifted in the distance, some familiar, some grotesque distortions of humanity. The children, the pale girl, and the others, ghosts? Reflections? Kay could not tell. They floated with a fluid grace, advancing and retreating with a rhythm that mimicked the train's slow heartbeat. A sudden hiss of air made him start. The platform seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting like a living entity. The shadows pressed against one another, forming shapes that suggested corridors, doorways, even staircases that led nowhere. Kay realized the platform itself was a trap, a liminal space designed to entangle those who dared step into its threshold. He wanted to scream, but his voice caught in his throat, swallowed by the oppressive hum that now filled the train car. From the far end of the platform, a faint glow emerged, a figure shrouded in mist, walking toward him with deliberate steps. Its face was obscured, yet the presence radiated authority and menace. Kay felt the pull of the figure as if invisible threads were tethering him to this apparition. He took a tentative step toward the light, then another, unable to resist as the whispers resumed in chorus. "Come, join us, the end awaits." Suddenly the train lurched violently. Kay stumbled, catching himself against the railing, and the shadows reacted, rippling outward like water disturbed by a stone. The platform shifted, revealing a series of grotesque faces pressed against the fog, their mouths open in silent screams. Each face seemed to know him, to recognize him. His heart hammered, and a cold realization dawned. This place remembered those who entered, catalogued them, and demanded repayment of some ancient debt. Kay's rational mind struggled for answers. Was this a hallucination induced by exhaustion, the train plunging into some forgotten tunnel? Or had he crossed into a dimension where reality was fluid, and fear itself dictated the rules? His own reflection in the window flickered, not his own, but a version of himself, twisted, eyes hollow, mouth stretched in a silent scream. The train had become a mirror of his deepest dread. From behind he heard a whisper, sharper than the rest, "Step off or remain forever." Turning slowly, he saw the girl from before, standing in the aisle, fingers still extended. Her hair swayed unnaturally, her eyes glinting with an intelligence that chilled him. She nodded toward the gap between train and platform, and Kay understood. This was the choice. Step forward and face the unknown, or remain trapped on the train with its endless passengers, suspended in a purgatorial journey without end. The glow of the distant figure intensified, revealing features just enough to terrify, hollow sockets where eyes should be, a mouth stitched in faint crimson, the faint outlines of wings folding and unfolding with each step. Kay felt the invisible threads tighten, tugging at his very soul. His muscles screamed in protest, but his feet moved of their own accord toward the opening. He could see the mist parting just enough to reveal the first of many faces staring at him, waiting. A sudden screech of the train brakes made him stumble, almost tumbling onto the void, and for a brief, fleeting moment, Kay saw the edge of reality fold back like fabric. Time bent. Shadows elongated. The whispers multiplied, layering over one another in a crescendo of malevolence and anticipation. He had a glimpse of what awaited beyond the threshold. Corridors of fog lined with eyes, hands reaching, and a horizon that twisted impossibly into itself. Kay's pulse surged, a mixture of dread and hypnotic curiosity. There was no turning back now, the train had delivered him to this precipice. The air around him hummed with expectation, the boundaries between car and void blurring. Step forward, or be forever suspended in this liminal nightmare. Kay's feet hovered over the void, trembling, yet moving forward as if guided by some invisible force. The train car behind him trembled, rattling like a beast straining against its cage, and the whispers swelled into a deafening chorus. Each syllable carried weight, pressing against his mind, urging surrender. The girl's hand remained extended, unwavering, a single anchor in the chaos. But even her presence was strange, as if she too were a part of the platform's dark design. The distant figure advanced, and Kay felt the pull intensify, the threads around his soul coiling tighter with each step. Faces in the mist shifted, forming grotesque mosaics of every passenger who had disappeared here over the years. Some faces were pleading, others laughing silently, all staring at him with uncanny familiarity. He realized, with paralyzing clarity, that the platform collected not just bodies but identities. Each step he took toward the glow threatened to erase his own. Kay's lungs burned as he forced air into them, his mind straining against the invisible tide. He glimpsed the horizon beyond the mist, a corridor of impossibilities, walls folding back on themselves, shadows twisting into shapes that defied human perception. A sudden surge of intuition struck him. This was a test, a crucible of fear and curiosity. Only by confronting the essence of the platform could he hope to survive. The girl whispered, her voice piercing through the cacophony, "See it, face it, or it will claim you." The glow intensified, revealing the figure fully now. A spectral being, limbs elongated unnaturally, wings of shadow folding and unfolding, hollow eyes that reflected Kay's own terror back at him. It stopped a few feet away, emanating a pressure that made the air shimmer and vibrate. Kay felt his memories, his very self, being catalogued, judged. The train's existence, the fog, the void, everything converged here in this moment of irreversible choice. Kay's mind screamed to retreat, but the threshold of the platform was alive with anticipation. He saw it all, every missing passenger, every distorted reflection, every shadow reaching to entangle him, and realized that hesitation would be his doom. The whispers urged him forward, each syllable a pulse against his skull. And yet, a single thought, primal and resolute, anchored him. To survive he must choose and he must act. He inhaled sharply, focusing not on the horror around him, but on the gap between fear and action. His foot moved forward deliberately, brushing the mist, feeling the intangible texture of the void. The shadows recoiled momentarily as if recognizing his defiance. The spectral figure lunged, wings slicing the air, and Kay felt the threads threatening to pull him in. With a desperate burst of will, he leapt toward the edge of the platform, aiming for a faint glimmer he had seen at the far end, a promise of exit, or at least a chance to escape the platform's grasp. Time fractured as he fell. The void expanded, swallowing sound, color, even gravity itself. Whispers became screams, faces dissolved into formless shadows, and the girl's hand was gone, leaving only the echo of her warning. Kay plunged into a stream of phosphorescent mist, tumbling through corridors of impossibility, walls folding like paper, shadows brushing against him, testing, probing, seeking to bind him. Then, abruptly, he landed on solid ground. The air was cool and tangible. The platform was gone, the train vanished, and the fog retreated like receding tide. Kay gasped, trembling, heartbeat hammering, eyes darting for any sign that the nightmare had followed. He stood on a deserted street, neon signs flickering faintly in the distance, and for a moment the world seemed real again. But the memory of the platform lingered, a pulse beneath his skin. The threads, the whispers, the hollow eyes, they had not fully released him. Kay understood, with a chilling clarity, that while he had escaped physically, the subway's grasp would follow, patient, waiting for the next lapse, the next moment of weakness. The void did not forgive, it only delayed, and the next ride might demand him again. Kay's legs trembled as he staggered along the deserted street, the neon lights casting fractured shadows that reminded him of the platform's endless void. Every sound, the distant hum of a tram, the faint drip of water from a fire escape, seemed amplified, carrying echoes of the whispers he had left behind. The memory of hollow eyes and shifting faces clung to him like a second skin, impossible to remove. He pressed his hands to his temples, willing the images to fade, but the subway's presence was woven deep into his consciousness. He approached a small convenience store, the neon sign flickering open, in uneven bursts. Its ordinary familiarity was both comforting and terrifying. Nothing about this world felt fully safe. As he stepped inside, he noticed the faintest flicker of movement in the reflection of the glass door. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, then a shadow behind a shadow moving with impossible intent. Kay froze. He realized the subway's influence might not reside in the platform alone. It could follow him, patient, subtle, waiting for the right moment to ensnare him again. The store clerk, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, looked up at Kay and smiled faintly, nodding in recognition. "You look like someone who's had a long ride," he said casually, as if nothing was unusual. Kay's stomach twisted. Was the man aware? Complicit? Or another fragment of the subway's design? He could not tell. The fluorescent lights flickered, shadows dancing across the walls, stretching and bending in ways that suggested the world itself was pliable, just as it had been underground. Kay purchased a bottle of water, the mundane act grounding him momentarily. He stepped outside and scanned the empty street, trying to map a route home, to reclaim a sense of normality. But in the corner of his vision, something moved, a faint, mist-like figure slipping between buildings. His pulse raced. The realization struck him with icy clarity. The subway had not released him entirely. The platform's reach was longer than physical space, capable of threading into perception, memory, and the fragile barrier of reality. Survival had been temporary, the game was ongoing. He began walking briskly, forcing himself to focus on concrete sensations. The crunch of gravel beneath his shoes, the cool evening air against his skin, the faint smell of asphalt. Yet even as he tried to ground himself, a low hum rose beneath his feet, almost imperceptible but unmistakable. The whispering threads of the platform, the voices of those lost in the tunnels, tugged at him from afar. Kay realized that the city itself could conceal entrances, hidden doorways that, if discovered by the unwary, would pull them into the subway's ever-expanding network. Hours later, he returned to his apartment. He locked the door, double-checked the windows, and sank onto the couch, muscles trembling. The room appeared unchanged, safe, ordinary. But Kay knew better. The shadows in the corners seemed slightly too deep, the air too still. He could almost hear faint echoes of the platform, whispers calling his name in soft repetition. He closed his eyes, willing sleep to come, yet part of him remained alert, aware that the ride was never truly over. Outside, the city thrummed with life, unaware of the hidden corridors beneath. A new subway car rumbled quietly through tunnels unseen, lights flickering, doors sliding open onto platforms that did not exist on any map. Somewhere, someone else waited, curious, distracted, unaware. And the whispers began again, faint at first, then rising, calling, coaxing, promising a journey from which return was uncertain. The last subway ride had ended for Kay, but for others, it had only just begun.